open up, please, to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And we're going to continue along here in our study in this book. Again, glad everyone is here this morning. We appreciate everybody's presence. So we ended up last week at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and we had talked a lot the last couple weeks about Paul's emphasis here on the Christian race and all of the things that kind of go into that and the important things that we can apply to our life. And then at the end of chapter 9 in verse 27, verse 26 and 27, it says, "Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified." So Paul is saying we got to run this race, but he himself, even, of course, the great apostle, is on guard for becoming unfaithful and for becoming, as he says, disqualified. So he's very focused on being disciplined and focused on that, and he uses this verse 27. But I discipline my body, as we said last week. It literally means to pummel. So he's focused on being faithful in his actions and word and thought and deed and everything else. So lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. So it's there's a special warning in there for preachers, and sadly, there are preachers that are in the Word each and every day, and sometimes sadly, even though preachers are in the Word all the time, there are preachers that are. I know of personally of two that these are years past, and that were having affairs with married women in their congregation. So there's a very real warning there for not only preachers but everyone in general. So so then this chapter 10 here is an extension now of this thought about being watchful and being careful about becoming unfaithful. And he, in this context of the race and how important it is to be focused and things like that, and he extends this thought then into chapter 10, and he uses some examples from the Old Testament. And so he's saying, he's just sort of extending the thought of be on guard to not be unfaithful. So the sort of guarding against apostasy, guarding against falling away, and he uses these examples from the Old Testament. So let's read, Ron, if we could start us out here. We're going to read verse 1 through 13 of chapter 10 in 1 Corinthians.
Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the extent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, and do not become idolaters as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents, nor complain as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. How far did you take them?
Down through, let's see, the end of 13.
Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the end of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overcome you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it.
Okay. Thank you. We'll get to text in a minute. We're going to bring back the weekly verse memorization thing. Greg reminded us here on a recent Wednesday that about this, and so we want to bring this back. So one verse a week. We were doing this before, and this will just help us, learn our scriptures and things like that. And so the verse for this week is 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, which is a key verse for our lesson here today. And if you look there, it's a very simple verse, but an important one for us to keep in mind, and it's the central thought for us this morning. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So that's the key verse in this section and the key thought here. So weekly verse. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. Get a little 3x5 card or something, put that in your phone, put it on your fridge, put it in your car, put it wherever you look, and if you just say that over and over again, you'll have it. Okay, so Paul there says, let's look at these first 4 verses here of this chapter. So he says, moreover, brethren. So this is one of those connecting words. Again, we're going to look at some specific words here in these first few verses. So moreover, brethren. So in other words, in addition, or importantly, or to add on to what I was just saying. In other words, moreover, brethren. So and again, this thought here is that he's just said, I discipline my body, bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself should become disqualified. Verse 27. So he's adding to this thought here now. So moreover, brethren, and then notice how many times the word all is used here. He says, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drink of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So he starts to list here, this important concept of all of these folks in the Old Testament here that he's talking about they were all together. This applied to all of them, and let's look at what they all had. And so we kind of this verse 1 through 4 here, these Old Testament advantages. So let's just look through these verses again. So moreover, my brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were what? Under the cloud. Under the cloud. What's the next thing that they had? They were all under the cloud, passed through the sea, passed through the sea, baptized into Moses, and drank and ate spiritual food. Okay, so what's that a reference to? They were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. What event is Paul referencing there? The Exodus, right? Yep. And so actually turn back just quickly, Exodus 14, because there's some verses here that we want to look at. So Exodus 14, this is a familiar event to us, but these are advantages that they had. And Exodus 14, look at verse, let's see, verse 19 and verse 19. Somebody read that when you get there. So this is, context here is that the children of Israel are coming out of, God's bringing them out of Egypt. They're right at the Red Sea there, and they're ready to cross over. So
the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them.
okay, so they're under the cloud. We get this picture, and what a awe-inspiring thing it must have been. There's this huge pillar of cloud that was leading them out of Egypt, and then moved around behind them as the Egyptian army came behind them. And then look at keep reading, Torrance. Verse 20. Verse 20.
Verse 20. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night.
Yeah, so we've got this cloud that is between the children of Israel and the Egyptians that are pursuing them. And we know from other verses that at night, after this event, at night there was a pillar of fire that was there, and then by day there was a cloud that led them through the sea. So then it also, in 1 Corinthians 10, they passed through the sea, as we know. They Torrance, just keep reading there. Verse 21 through 21 and 22.
Okay. Then Moses stretched out his hand. Over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left.
Yeah. So they were under the cloud. They passed through the sea. They were back in our verse here in 1 Corinthians 10 that Paul says they all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So it's a sort of yes.
Recently read where they had found chariot wheels in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
And that where they found them was 90 feet deep. So the walls of water were literally pretty high walls of water.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it was 90 feet deep whenever they went across there.
Yeah. Yeah. It was again just it must have been an awe-inspiring thing for the children of Israel to walk through that with walls of water on each side. I mean, we can only imagine what it looked like. But what Paul's point here is God's presence was certainly with them. Baptized into Moses. So it's a figurative name or term for baptized. What's the? I think most of us know this. This is an alliteration, or it's a word that baptizo, which means to what? To dip or immerse or to plunge, exactly. And so Paul says they were baptized into Moses. So it's a figurative term. They were covered. Moses was leading them. They were fully immersed into Moses and his leadership through God and things like that. So, I think we understand that. But so all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So this vivid picture and account of that God brought them out of Israel, out of bondage there. And then Paul also says they ate and drank. Look at go back to 1 Corinthians 10. I know we're flipping around a little bit here this morning, but we'll stay back here in 1 Corinthians 10. It's all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea. Verse 2, all ate the same spiritual food. What is that? They all ate the same spiritual food. What's that a reference to? Manna, right, exactly. So which they had for every day of their 40 years that they were wandering there in the wilderness. Every day they woke up and manna was on the ground. And so they had that reminder every day that God was providing for them, in addition to the cloud at day and the pillar of fire by night. And then they also, it says they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So when this drinking of this spiritual rock, that's a specific reference. There's two references to that. What our Old Testament scholars here in the room, what's that a reference to? Correct, yeah, water from the rock, exactly. So there were a couple of times that this happened. One was at Horeb early on in the, we're not going to turn there, but let's see, I've got some scripture references here if you're taking notes. One was Horeb, let's see, and Exodus 17, and God commanded Moses to strike the rock and water came out there in Horeb. Later in Numbers 20, God commanded Moses to speak to the rock and water would come out. But what did Moses do? He struck the rock again, exactly, and God was not happy with him. And it was that action, Moses in essence took the credit for himself, or partially for himself there. And so God was not happy with Moses because of that, and it's because of that action that God did not allow Moses to go into the promised land. So, but the point is God provided for them, and Paul makes the connection there that spiritual rock that followed them was Christ. So in a physical sense, Christ was involved in this Old Testament pre-incarnate, before he came to the earth as a man, of course. He was involved in the provision of the children of Israel, and so in a spiritual sense today, he provides for us spiritually. So there's lots of types and antitypes that are at play here. But the point is, they were provided for here, and so Paul lists these things and as these advantages. But in verse 5 through 11, we come on another list here that is instructive for us. And so the beginning of the first word in chapter 5 is this little word, but. And that's an important word as we're reading and studying through. When you see a but there, that means that what comes next typically is not good and is something for our learning. And so Paul says here, but in spite of all these things, every day they were provided for, the cloud, the fire, all this other stuff. There's actually just another thing here. That it's not in the text, but how many does the text say? It's actually in Exodus 12 and verse 37. We won't go back there, but how many men does the scripture say came out of Egypt? How many were? Anybody remember? there were 600,000 men, not including children, is what the scripture says. So in Hebrew convention, the men were counted, the women were not counted in the count, but it mentions children here. So if there were 600,000 men, there were, in general, probably they were married. So if we double that, that's 1,200, and then plus children, singular would be another 600. So that's we're now up to 1,800,000. And if we want to just round up to, if people had more than one child, we could round up to 2 million or keep it at 1.8, whatever. If you divide that, just do the math here, for 40 years, I did the math, so it's 13,400 days in 40 years. You can check me on this if you're at your phone. 40 years time, is it 13,400 days, and divided by 2 million, the math comes out to about 139 funerals per day. Dave, you want to check me on that? I think are you? So 365 times 40. Oh, sorry, I thought that's what you were doing. No one put you on the spot. Anyway, it's 139, give or take. Well, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. So anyway, lots of funerals every day. I'll just say it this way, that were continued reminders of God's promise. Minor point there, but anyway, so all of these advantages, and then so now look at what Paul says in verse 5. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So let's look at verse 7 through 11, and let's just list the things there that the Old Testament Israelites did, and we can call this Old Testament behavior. Old Testament behavior. So what's the first thing that we find there? Yes, idolaters. Idolatry. We're just going to put idolatry. Let us not. That's verse. Most of them God was not well pleased. Let's see. Do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So that's a description of the event there that took place at the foot of the mountain when Moses was on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments. And what was going on down there at the foot of the mountain at that time? It says the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. What was going on there at the base of the mountain? They were having a party, yes. A big party, right? And what was going on in that party? They made a golden calf, yes. It's later Moses came down and said, what has happened here? And Aaron said, well, the people just gave me their gold and I put it in the fire and this golden calf came out. So yes, they thought that Moses wasn't coming back, and so they had a huge party. They made a golden calf. They were worshiping the golden calf, all of this stuff. So they became idolaters there. Verse 8, what's that? Sexual immorality, right? And that's, nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. This is a reference, we're not going to read all of these, but Numbers, verse 25. This was harlotry with Moab. So, and the children of Israel had intermarried, and so there was 23,000 died before that process was stopped there. So that was, remember, Phinehas took a spear and very, graphically, he plunged the spear through one of the children of Israel and his idolatrous Moabite wife. So it was that stopped the plague there. But they were strictly commanded not to interact with these other outside tribes and people and things. Verse 9, nor let us tempt Christ, as some were tempted and destroyed by the serpents. So, tempt Christ. What was that? Anybody remember? The thing, they were complaining. Exactly, they were complaining, and so there was God sent. They were complaining about being in the desert, not being back in Egypt. They wanted to go back, and God sent these fiery serpents among them. So, nor complain. And then, let's see, verse 10, nor complain, as some also complain and were destroyed by the destroyer. So, this is Numbers 14. They were complaining again, and this is when the 12 spies came back. How many out of the whole, that present generation, and Doug could write about that, that were faithful? 2, right? Who were they? Joshua and Caleb, exactly. So only. Well, yes, Moses was too. 2 went over into the children of Israel. Y'all are keeping me on track here today. That's good. So yes, so it's 2 went over. So yeah, so all of this, in spite of all of this, all these advantages, this was the result. So let's talk about this. New Testament advantages. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Really, I think verse 6 is kind of like the overarching attitude that led to all of those things. And
Yeah.
because it says, that we should, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And that was, that desire for evil, that general attitude of it, led to those other behaviors.
Yes.
That we see listed following.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And lust after evil, running out of room here, things. Exactly. And that does tie all of that together. And so they had all these advantages. That's what the result was of that. That was their behavior. For us today, what are the advantages that we have as New Testament Christians? It's just on this side of the cross with what are just some of the advantages that we have that they did not have? We have the written word, yep. We have the written word. What else? We have the cross, the knowledge of the cross, all the Yep, better. Yep. Just better promises. We have the church, right? We've got, we've got all these things. So we have forgiveness through Christ. Yep. We have forgiveness in Christ. They had their sins were rolled forward. They could make sacrifices, but we have these better promises. All of that. Great high priest. All of those things. Exactly. So, yes.
All under like Ephesians 1:3, we have all spiritual blessings.
Yep. All spiritual blessings. Exactly. And so, in Christ. Do we find ourselves at any point in here? We have all these advantages. They had all these advantages. We got to guard against finding ourselves on that list. And we're not making golden calves this in our day and age, right? But we've talked about this before. But there are idols in modern America, are there not? What are the modern day idols? Our money is going to save us, right? What's the definition of an idol is what? Yes, anything we put in the place of God, so that we're looking to save us. So yeah, our money is one. Yes, Yep. Our technology, all of these things. We've got our own idols. So, but the key verse here, in addition to this verse 6 that Lloyd rightly mentioned, these things have become our examples. Verse 6, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they lusted. Verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And actually verse 11, now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. So all of this happened for our benefit, or our examples. And then verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And so that's the admonition for us. We don't want to find ourselves on this list, and we could make a bigger list here if we wanted to. And so that's the point here that Paul's trying to get across to us. And so vitally important to be faithful, to be focused, to be on the lookout, on the watchful, for being for apostasy, to being being unfaithful, disobedient, things like that. So that's the point there. And he kind of concludes this here in verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. So we could talk a lot about that. But all of these things that they entered into, God was saying there's that was their choice to do that. And this concept of temptation, no temptation, we are surrounded with temptation in this world, but none has overtaken you except as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Where else, which other New Testament writer talks about temptation? James, yeah, James chapter 1. So that's the thing. So we'll leave it there, but let's just, our takeaway for today is this, therefore, him who thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall, and learn from the Old Testament examples here that we have, and be on guard for that. So, questions, comments, anything? Yes?
Writer talks about all of these things, and he kind of puts it all under the category of unbelief. That was the thing God was displeased with, that led to a lot of the trouble
Yep.
that they had, was their lack of belief, trust, dependence on God.
Yep, exactly. So the closer we're drawing to God through His Word and everything, the less and less this is going to be a factor in our life. So he's got some important concepts here through the rest of this chapter about. We could just, as we'll close with this, we're going to sum this up for next week. Cannot dabble in worldliness. Worldliness. That's going to be the theme for next week, and it's an add-on to this verse. Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
I made a connection that maybe I'm slow to make, but
No.
when you were talking about Aaron melting down the gold in the fire, his sons had issues with fire and
Yep.
died because
Yep.
he didn't pass on any of his past experience.
Yeah.
The example of that led to his sons dying.
Yep. Nadab and Abihu, they had issues with profane or unauthorized fire too. You're exactly right. So, yeah.